I wanted to comment further on that to say that I would likely, assuming that any of the changes from AU Core, like any of those that were materially significant for AU base, like for, hang on. Okay. No, I'll reword it differently and a lot less formal. So we're going to publish a thing, right, in June for AU Core. We're going to go, we've fixed some ballot issues, we've made some decisions, here it is. If those require an AU base change, as the AU Core, we would request that you do another snapshot
Yeah.
so that we could publish off that, basically.
Yeah. Yeah, we planned to. What was going to be in that snapshot?
Yeah. Because when AU Core goes out to ballot for real in August, it's going in a twin cycle for AU base. So that will be together anyway. So
Yeah.
not an issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. I think that makes sense because then, like, the FHIR Work Group can say, "Oh, you really need these things done. Let's do those and do a snapshot." And then some other things might take longer. So, yeah, I think that makes sense. I think it just means what it means is the FHIR Work Group's got to be prepared to be active this way in every ballot cycle, right? Because there will be, whatever's under ballot, there will be a possibility of things coming through.
That's what happened when other people depend on you.
Yes.
Depend on you.
Yeah, and like we have to kind of work this out for us because we're the only affiliate I know that does this way. so
how do other affiliates do it?
Well, US Core is its own independent beast, right? So it's always just,
it doesn't have a base to pay attention to.
There's no base to pay attention, and so it's I think
in the UK, they've got an they do have a UK base, but NHS does a whole bunch of stuff that's again independent from how the affiliate works, and their base doesn't honestly do much. New Zealand would be the closest, but I think it's honestly the same group that does both NZ base and their use case specs, so it all just comes through the same group. Canada might be the closest.
Yeah.
I don't actually know how their work groups are formed, but I have a lot of chats with them. But they have a similar kind of separation between specs that we do.
Yeah, okay. That's good to know because it'd be interesting if there's any tips that they
What did Canada call their two ones again? Do you remember? They call them base and core like we do, or do they call them core and base? Or?
They call them core, and I think they call it baseline. It's got the word base in it.
So core is what we call base, and baseline is what we call core, just to make sure everybody's confused.
No, I don't think so.
Good. I just worried.
Yeah. Anyway.
But they're redoing stuff anyway, and they're about to follow what we're doing in Sparked, hopefully, or so they say. So we'll find out.
Well, aren't we good? Cool. Anyway, so I think that's probably okay for that item. Then, is there anything else to add on that one?
No, I think we've done that to death for now. If anything else comes up, we can come to it in another meeting.
Yeah, I don't think there was much else to add for now. Cool. So the other item discussed in the Q2 session was around variance and how between AU base and AU core and how to put that into a process of what's required out of any group producing specifications. So I think we're
going to have to log some actions here too, because I don't think we took them on the day.
No, because I think here's the information. I'll reload it.
Yeah, a thing that I was slow to realise in the discussion on variance was that this was a thing that, in a sense, only HL7 affiliate projects need to seek approval for.
Maybe not entirely true. I mean, yes, plus that it's a little bit unclear on whether or not this applies to the AFCC, the projects who are seeking endorsement as going through the FHIR community process. And sorry, were you going to say something there, Brett?
Oh no, I was just saying I've got there was a thing discussion about the management framework and the AFCC and what it meant for the FHIR Work Group later, and I think this was one of the things that was mentioned in that discussion. But I've had some more thoughts on that as well, and I think there's a piece of work there that I think we need to talk about in general. What we're going to actually say the FHIR Work Group, like I think part of it's saying what are our processes with our specs that we care about, and I think that is also modelling good artifacts and behaviour as to what the OCC should care about. And I think it would be then good to get a position from the AFCC to say, how do these things play into judging community process and quality issues?
So things like, we would like you to follow our variance process. We would like you to register your variances in the way that we advocate, but we don't actually have any way of commanding you to do it.
Yeah, correct. Because effectively they're external projects. But I think what after is just to say, here are some tools for the AFCC that we say this is evidence. This is how you implement good quality community process.
Yeah. This is how you don't confuse people about what you're doing and reduce their implementation costs.
Yeah, exactly. Because it affects everyone obviously implementing. So the more you understand variance from these specs, the easier it is for people to implement, basically. So yeah. Anyway, but I think this is really at this level, it's about what do we need specs to do as part of their development within HL7 Australia, and that's mainly just making sure our process is good. So we're defining what good is. Yeah.
So some actions I think that will come out of this,
yeah.
might agree to them today or not. And for those of you on the line who weren't at this riveting meeting, it was very action-packed. We agreed that we would have an AU base and AU core variance process. In other words, we expect there to be compliance with AU base and AU core. And what that doesn't mean an approval thing, although we hope that people do. It means that for AU core, for example, we agree that we will use AU base profiles and extensions. And if we're unable to reuse those, we're going to document the variance, basically, so that if you pick up AU core and we're actually not compliant with AU base, which we currently are, but if we're not, we would say, which bit have we've redefined an extension, or we've done this other thing. I'm going to say the specific reasons on why we've done it differently. And we would put that in the FHIR IG itself. And then we would email the FHIR Work Group co-chairs to say, look, it turns out we can't use AU base in this way. Here's where we've documented that, so that the FHIR Work Group can discuss whether or not this is appropriate, or if they have any guidance for us, or how they want to react to that. It's a bit of an extreme situation, because truly in the AU core space, if we think it doesn't work in AU base, we'd actually just raise a change request to change AU base. But like, assuming that's not possible, this is what we'd have to do.
Yeah.
And so AU base itself doesn't have to do any variance because it's the bottom stuff. And then we've also set in place an AU core variance process, which is the same thing, which says whether you're e-requesting, provider directory, whatever you are default expected to comply with AU base and AU core. And where you don't, please document what you've done differently. List the profiles that you're not compliant with. List the reasons why. And same thing again, email the FHIR Work Group co-chairs who'll go have a look at it. Now, all this should come to a head when the different FHIR IG projects want to go to ballot. And so they need to submit, for example, a notice for intention to ballot to say, hey, we want to ballot in August. Here's what we're doing. And the FHIR Work Group needs to, as part of its governance, have a look at that and go, oh yeah, that's good. And what they would be doing is checking that your specification actually conforms to AU base or AU core. And if it doesn't, that you've actually documented that and why. So it's not an approval point. It's just making sure we're really clear across the ecosystem where we have variation?
It would be nice to have some tooling to help with that.
So far, all of Graham's tooling decides that if your meta profile is different to my meta profile, and they are because they're different profiles, it's a breaking change. So you just find every single thing has at least one breaking change, and every date that is authored is also a breaking change. There is some tooling and it is good, but you've got to use it as a grain of salt in order to then like generate the variance off that.
Okay, it's more sensitive than you typically want, but at least it gives you a good start.
That, and if you've got anything interesting about slicing, trying to do automated checks between different kind of slicing is just don't even bother.
Mm. Yeah.
It's just really hard.
Yeah, I think a lot of it too is primarily getting the groups to think about it as part of their process as well, to say, we're doing something. Oh, are we doing something different? Why are we doing something different? Should the underlying spec be different? Because that's the kind of questioning we want to happen. So it's a harmonization exercise to say, is my world actually different, or should are the underlying specs somehow too restrictive or something? And that's actually
Exactly.
a good test for the underlying specs as well. So
yeah, if we get a lot
yeah.
of variance from AU base or AU core, that says there's something wrong in them and they need to change if people can't use them and have to do something different.
Yeah, and I think too, like, we're in a world where we say, we think there's one profile for every resource type, and there may not be. There might be a world where there's multiple, right? And we need to think about, are there two worlds that are very different from each other? And I think this is all just going to come out in the wash. So it's more just having a clear picture, and it's really great for essentially the gap analysis between one spec and the other, right? So if you need to implement it, you will need to implement that variance explicitly, right? So it's as an implementer, it's a super useful piece of kit, because if you're doing AU core out of the box, and then there's no spec that says I vary this way, you're going to have to deal with that variance when you use that spec.
So can we say there's just a way to do this, like a heading that's the same in all the AU ones to
Yeah,
tell you
that's
where to
what I
go
wanted.
instead of going, where is this?
Yeah, that was kind of where I wanted to get to, is like, where does it live in a spec? Is there a template for
Yeah, a
that
template
content?
place would be useful.
Because
Yeah,
I would assume it would go in guidance, right? So we would
I
have
think
it
that
in,
makes sense.
well, not AU based because it gets to get away with it, but like AU core would have it, and e-requesting would have it, and PD would have it, and it'd be the same, like in the same
Yeah,
place with the
yeah,
same page heading.
yeah.
And we could do a little template
I think
for
that'd be
how
good.
to talk about it.
Yeah, I think that'd be good, just to have a template where people can go. Because do you think it would be like down to the element level? We say profile X, element Y.
If you needed to, I mean, if the only thing that you've done is different is you removed must support from one element, that's all you need to say. Like
Yeah,
that's what the difference is. I think you don't need to,
yeah.
you don't want to confuse it with having, here are the full list of ways we comply, and here's the, you
Oh,
know,
no, yeah. Just say difference. Yeah, that makes sense. So basically, it's a big list of elements that are different in some manner.
I mean,
well,
the way you could, I mean, if you wanted to go really coarse grained, you'd say we use AU base patient instead of AU core patient in the story. But you'd like to say what you use differently, what parts of AU core patient you're not adopting.
Yeah, and I
I
think
think
too
that's
that,
what you have to do, whether that's terminology or cardinality or must support.
and another question for me is, like, say you have an AU core spec, do you do API differences as well?
No. Well, hang on, I'll qualify that. So we've only put in our variance profiles
Mm.
intentionally.
Mm.
And for most downstream IGs, well, a lot of them, they won't have the same actors.
No,
Like e-requesting, that's
yeah,
filler,
different
placer,
different
repository.
requirements.
That's
Yeah,
not the AU core stuff.
Yeah.
I suppose we could look at, if it's meaningful, the capability statement stuff, assuming you had an actor definition that crossed over, but
Yeah,
it wouldn't
I think you're
automatically
right.
apply.
Yeah, I think you're right because like the premise is that all APIs are FHIR compliant, right? So that's the thing, and it's So then I guess you're right. It is more actor dependent, and the different IGs will have different requirements, like in terms of the API to get their mission done. So it doesn't really kind of make sense, I guess, unless you're trying to achieve exactly the same thing. You can't, the thing is, if you're doing it in a FHIR sort of compliant manner, I don't really see you'll have variants because you won't choose to do. You can't do anything really different. Anyway, let's maybe just say no until it's a problem.
All right.
Cool.
So I think an action out of this. So because Dushi's not here, I'd like to give her the action, and get her to mock up what that might look like. HL7AU actually has like a sample FHIR IG with headings and everything, so we could
That'd
put
be
that
good.
content there.
That would be great. I think because that's a really good guide for everyone who has to do it, and that is a good place to do it.
And
So
so
we're
my
going to make that
assumption,
action.
therefore, talking for AU core, since we're fully compliant to AU base, is we're still going to have this page, whatever page we call it, right? And it would just say there are like fully complies with AU base.
Yep. So you state it. Yep. Perfect.
Do we care what the heading of the page is? Because what if you had to go looking for this, would we call it like variance? Is that what people think it is? Because I'm bad at naming things, so help.
Yeah, or variant statement or something. I don't know.
We can go looking for what's a good name for this, but yeah, I'd be tempted to have the page variant statement.
I think it needs an adjective though, because variant statement. Oh no, maybe that'll do. Just variant statement. All right.
Statement of variance? No. I think variant statement is a good interim name.
All right. Variant statement it is.
Yeah,
We'll proceed with that. Dushi and I'll have a look at it and send this group like an email when we've got it up and what it looks like, and you can provide some feedback then.
That is sounding good. That's good.
Next
so
action,
I think that's a good.
Next action though. So this is a FHIR Work Group pronouncement, which obviously I'm in full support of. But now we need to tell the rest of the work groups that this is what they have to do. So we need comms coming out from the FHIR Work Group going, we would like you to do one of these, please, and here's what it should look like.
We've also got to say enough about what they are, because I mean the variance statements are going to have somewhere enough guidance so that people reading these things, as opposed to writing them, know what on earth this page is there for and what it does. And
surely it's obvious when it says this guide has complies with AU base.
I mean, we could have a preamble.
That might be enough. Yeah. That might be enough. But look, maybe a single sentence will do. I'm just thinking we want to say in it enough about what it is so that people recognize what it is, as opposed to just wondering what it is. And that will help us make sure that when we tell people to do it, they know what it is they're doing.
Yeah, I think we can. I think we should. It has enough behind it that it should be like in our process guidance material, what we're talking about and why we do it as well. So maybe not in the IG, but maybe a governance sort of piece that says this is what a variant statement is, and this is what it contains, and this is why it's here, and then we can sort of refer to it as being
yeah, I think we've
policy.
Committed. Yeah. We've committed to doing that. That action's on you and me, Brett, with rubric review.
Yeah. I think that's good, and like you've got a draft which will work. So the So I think these are so the actions are okay. We've got template example work by Dushi.
Yes.
And I guess Danielle and
No, I'm
myself.
not writing the columns. I have too many conflicts of
No,
interest.
no,
I'm
no.
on all the
I'm not
work
doing.
groups.
I think we should do. I think we should do the work and then do the comms after that. Like, I'm happy to do the comms,
All right.
but
Unless anyone
it,
else in the group wants to volunteer.
we love that.
Nah. All right. It's up to you, Brett.
Yeah. I'll. Yeah. I, I'll. I can. Yeah. Put me down for the document and put me down for the writing up something and the comms. But I'll liaise with Danielle. She'll have to review this course variance statement governance material for sure.
We need to put a time frame on this stuff.
Yeah.
So we'll try and get a template in the next couple of weeks. What's today? Oh, it's the 26th.
So we've got 10 days, well, 14 days to the next meeting. 15.
Hang on, when's the next meeting? The 11th?
That's it.
Oh no,
10th.
10th?
10th, yeah.
All right, let's say we'll try to have that template done by the 10th.
We could have a
And that way
draft
we can have a
of
look.
governance. Yeah, that's good. And I can draft governance because you've already written a nice proposal, and I'll just put it on, get it on a page in the governance section of HL7 Australia and work on it.
All right.
Cool. That's great. So I'll progress to that.
Just question then, what else do we need to do? Is there anything else we need to do? We're going to document what this process is and how it works. We're going to have a template that will say, here's how we would like you to do this. Are we going to send comms out to the other work groups to say, here's what you need to do now? What else?
Yeah,
Is there
I
anything
think,
else that needs to happen?
Yeah, because I think, because effectively, I guess we're saying to make your IG acceptable to the FHIR Work Group, you will need to do this, right? In that comms, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I think that's it. And then that becomes part of our ticking the box, which is more process things about when we're approving IGs for publication.
It becomes also part of the technical evaluation, which we've not tabled yet, but we'll have to. We've got a couple of months yet, but we'll need to table how and who is doing technical evaluation of IGs that want to go to ballot.
Yeah, just how many parts there are, and I had some. Yeah, there are some thought. Like, obviously, this is one of the things, but I think there's a few things we need to kind of have a checklist of what we do. All right. Happy with that one? That was good. Okay, cool. That's exactly what I wanted to get through out of those two things. So some action. Provider directory project. So this was an interesting discussion as so this was in the afternoon session. So there is a summary there of what we talked about. Now, originally the FHIR Work Group, we've already talked about provider directory and hosting that project, and the extent of that project was to correct a couple of issues, which we actually looked at specifically and approved the changes. And also then there was essentially a cleanup, which is more of a refactoring to point at a later version of AU base and clean up some of the consequences of that and move to a new HL7 Australia template for the publishing template. So that was like a cleanup of publishing kind of activity. So the scope of change was very small and was basically like two fixes. And the intent was at that point to go to a ballot at some point with that material. So so I think if that was to happen, I think that would be fine. Obviously, adding in now this variance process that needs to be handled and any other things we want to put in as requirements for that ballot to occur. However, through this discussion, there was a hint that there was an intent to do more work, including adding some use cases and perhaps expanding on what the scope is of the current provider directory IG, which rang some alarm bells and basically, raised some questions about how that would proceed, considering that was not what the project was planned. So I think there was some idea that
Scope creep.
Well, it was just like, it sounded like just another project was kicking off somewhere that had nothing to do with us, right? So I think that was mainly just to, and I think that the upshot is that really we need to talk to the agency about what their plans are and see how that works, in terms of the artifacts. At the moment, really, there's no scope for any further activity in terms of changes with provider directory IG. So it's really just, if they are planning to do another project, it's either going to be an external project away from HL7 Australia, or it's going to, which means it's no longer an HL7 Australia. The next version would not be an HL7 Australia artifact. So they sort of turn it into an external project, or there's got to be some creation of a project within HL7 Australia to do the work. And so that would come back to the FHIR Work Group as a proposal. So that was kind of told that's how, because they can't kind of have it halfway, have it both ways. So I think there were some questions as to where that was going to proceed, and at the moment there was no pressing thought about going to ballot. So they were told when the ballot periods were going to be and what they would need to do to achieve that. So I think at the moment, since this was a FHIR Work Group hosted activity anyway, there is really no project leader or a project running. So everything would have to be discussed with the FHIR Work Group anyway, if there was anything to happen at all, like balloting or so forth. So like we would have to approve the content to even go to ballot as a FHIR Work Group. Okay, so that would be something we would need to do in the group. And if they're deciding to run another project, now this is where we're now saying, well, what does that mean for the existing provider directory IG, and what happens if, well, that's up to them. I guess they have to decide if they're going to do it one way or another.
How many people are using the current provider directory design?
Yeah, so really it's it's the secure message. It's a secure messaging vendors project. So there's a group called the National Secure Messaging Network, which are the secure messaging vendors and some users of that secure messaging systems, and they are effectively a quasi user group of the FHIR provider directory. So really that means that there's really only like 3 secure messaging vendors who have are even in the mix here. But they did set this up. I believe they've lost one of them along the way as well. So there's it's really just a few users. But however, they have kind of standardized there's still problems with the implementation, but they have attempted to standardize and federate their provider directories using this method. So so I think it's a real usage, and they're actually using it in production to do business. So but it is limited to secure messaging, and I think the next project they're talking about is expanding it out to using it for other purposes. However, so again, like this is kind of like, well, how does that project even exist, and what do we think about it? So because it's definitely not until if it was brought back as an HL7 Australia project proposal, I think we could deal with it, and they'd have to do the things that everyone else does. But so I think that's more maybe just a state of the world. They were kind of going to talk about it at the agency, but it also probably there's potential that they want to do something else, and if they're planning to publish a FHIR IG, I'd hope they'd want to be a FHIR community process based endorsed IG, and we'd have as a FHIR coordination committee to have to work out what that meant for that project, and that was definitely mentioned in the AFCC as one of the potential projects that might go external. But we'd also have to work out what we do with our artifacts if that happened, because effectively there'd be an orphaned PD spec that would no longer be in HL7. Essentially, there'll be no work being done on it under HL7, so there'll be no enhancement to that. Yeah, so I think it's more of there's a high level question about which way they'll go, and then what would we do about it. But it was directly suggested that if they did want to run it as HL7 Australia project, that they should create a project proposal with the scope of their work and run it, and decide if they're going to form a new group, or if they want to propose a new group, or if they want to run it under some other mechanism. Yeah. Anyway,
So
summary.
yeah, no, that's good. So there's a PD spec that exists. The last formal version of it was PD V2, I believe. It's currently in a continuous integration build that the agency's done some work on.
Yeah, exactly.
And so I guess the agency's going to come back to us, and you said July, was it?
Yeah, June, July was the dates.
They're going to continue on this and progress it to a next formal release, which their earliest opportunity would be the August ballot. Yeah. And any changes need to come through this group.
Yeah, so I think if they decide to go to ballot, we would have to tell them what they need to do further from what they've got to complete the content for ballot. Hey, Ruben.
If they do proceed with this, will they be required to set up a TDG for it?
They would have to indicate how they would get the interested stakeholders into a committee making decision. So it would be probably setting up. I'd say it's either going to run as a project, and we'd say it's a FHIR Work Group project, and they'd hold the different meeting cycles, but it's or set up a full committee as a special interest group kind of thing, as a TDG. It'd be reasonable to set up a TDG, I think, for this purpose, especially if they're expanding.
I think it's more than reasonable. It should be the expectation.
Yeah. So I think it's I would be comfortable if they decided to do that, to say they should set that up, and then we could then monitor things better, and we'd have a lot more visibility. Yeah.
I think I'd go further, Brett. I would tell them that it's our expectation that they do that, because if they don't, then they're going to be relying on the co-chairs of the FHIR Work Group to do all the things that the TDG co-chairs do, and I don't think that that's fair, unless all those co-chairs put up their hand and say they'd love to do it.
Yeah, I think you're right, because it is like a specialization as well. So it's not as that's not really core FHIR Work Group business to sort out provider directory. Yeah. Okay, I think that's a fair comment. I guess it's So I guess there's a question on.
It's also there are some changes they'll need to make about this. Like if you look at FHIR artifacts and go to capability statements.
Yeah.
Is there just one? Is there two? I can't tell, and we can't get to the actual artifact itself. I don't think not required is a FHIR obligation value.
Yeah,
so there needs to be a bit of touch up. That is some FHIR stuff that I can see is coming through from the earlier version of PD, but now there's still some stuff to be done by the time this goes out to ballot.
Yeah, I think that's I guess the thing
and
is
also there's search parameters that are What is AU-receiving facility-namespace-ID? That's
they're
brand new search parameters.
Yeah, no, they've been there. No, they've been there. They're in.
Should they be migrated to AU base?
I think they are in AU base.
Nope, they sure aren't.
Oh, aren't they? Oh,
Nope. Noting that, well, let's go have a look. AU base's search parameters. They don't exist in AU base, but they also aren't in the search parameter section of PD. So I don't know where some of this stuff actually is at.
Yeah, it's a good point. It's not a PD domain either. So it
But
makes
that's
me think
AU
base.
but
Makes me
they're
think it's
actually
AU base.
not in AU base itself. So there's some real missing things here.
Yeah.
I thought some. Yeah, I thought some. Oh, yeah, not the search parameters. Yeah, good point. I don't know. Yeah,
Which
some
would
of the
be like if
extensions
they
made it
come out on
not,
what do they have to do as a FHIR work group. We'll need to go. Well, I mean, the search parameters they're creating need to be defined and published.
Yeah, indeed. I'm not even sure. Oh, hang on.
Has AU base got much in the way of search parameters?
It has several, actually.
Right.
Yeah, no, we expect it to be there, but it's not.
Oh, there we go. Search parameters. Yeah, it's got a few.
Now, this just might be, it's not picking it up on the page or something, I don't know, but there's some fundamental FHIR artifact correctness that needs to be undertaken for this IG before it can get any further.
Yeah, that's right. And I think the FHIR Work Group has to approve that it's adequate to go to ballot, right? Basically, it's no good publishing things you know are wrong. So it's and obviously we got a few more asks with the variance statement and stuff as well, which we've added in to their what we need them to do. So I think that would all be things to discuss. But obviously, we need someone to we need a proper leader contact for this work, right? In terms of who's going to own this problem, and even to get it to ballot with just the changes they've got, they're going to have to do more work, right? So it's I think we need to be able to feed that back to them as to what's needed and take it from there. So yep.
I think the sooner we make them aware of that, the better, because it's an investment in human resources to get these things going, and co-chairs in particular with minutes and meetings and agendas, etc., artifacts, applying changes. I think projects need to understand the sort of commitment that this sort of thing takes and to ensure that people are available.
Yeah, I think that's good. And I think the thing is too, this is at the end of the day, this is actually a pretty important spec in terms of the provider directory capability.
That was going to be my next question. It's not clear to me whether this is the spec that's going to underpin the newly announced National Consolidated Provider Directory, which has been put forward as part of the National HIE work. It'll be good to get that level of clarity too.
Yeah, I think it's definitely through the production of this as well. Like the NHSD was involved as well closely, and they were very much aligned in understanding what it did and how it did it as well. So I think that's the thing really. There was actually quite a lot of investment in this from various parties. Yeah, so it was because it took nearly 18 months or 2 years to get through the process, and then they did go through an implementation phase, so it was actually in action. So I think it would be good to. So
who's implemented it and who's exposing APIs?
HealthLink, HealthLink has it. So that's the stuff I know that's been talked about as beginning with test data and things like that, and I believe it would be an implementation of this. So as part of their test sort of capability we could have available. So HealthLink's probably the biggest one. Argus did it, but now that's also it's all Clan Williams, yeah, which is HealthLink and Argus as well. And I know ReferralNet did it as well. And I know Medical Objects did do it, but I believe they've dropped out of the program. So I don't know what that means either in terms of the world. But yeah, but that's essentially, and NHSD definitely, whilst not directly implementing it, I think they were definitely trying to work out how they could. They were very much looking at compliance to this as well, and also being able to essentially register the endpoints for the secure messaging in the standard way. But I think there was a number of implementation things that came back as part of the project that people had variants in how they did things and things like that. So that's all stuff that should get fed back into the next round of the spec. But yeah, it's more just I would be more comfortable if there was a group and a project and it was in a cycle of renewal, especially if the agency is going to invest in provider directories in various ways. That would be a forum where you could do it. But yeah, because it's also too like obviously if the agency decides to do its own thing, like this is no longer available to the agent. I mean, we're not going to publish their changes or anything. You know, there's nowhere to publish it. They'd have to set up their own build pipeline and work it out, right?
They'd have to negotiate the use of things in HL7 Australia's namespace too.
Oh yeah, true. If they were just going to true. It's either leave this as a underlying spec and do more, or these are all questions. So it's really like I think it would be very complicated to do a separate project.
Yeah, I mean, if people have built to this with its names in the HL7 Australia namespace, then it's going to be messy for them to move them to a namespace they control. So they're going to have to find some way of negotiating continuing use of the namespace.
Yeah, but I think if the aim is some sort of centralized service, like that's like I think it, whilst it's had its moments, this spec, I think it actually did work out pretty well because they did actually have federated provider directories operating. So you can actually search across provider directories no matter which vendor you're connected to in terms of the business. So that's kind of cool in terms of it's actually a distributed, implementation effectively. So which is a hell of a lot more sophisticated than just trying to get everyone to put their records in one place. So it's because effectively the NHSD was that project, which has also not really been that successful because the registrations don't happen to actually keep that up to date. So there's a whole bunch of things there that I think are questions, but these are all like specific provider directory problems, and it's not a FHIR Work Group thing, so let's leave it there. Cool. So I don't know what actions to take out of that other than we're kind of. I think maybe this is a
contact them
Ruben.
and say
I think it was
it's going to be a good idea to have an HL7 Australia working group with them to manage the HL7 Australia workload.
Well, yeah,
as part of getting this developed as part of HL7 Australia environment.
Yeah, and I think I was going to ping Ruben. Like I think at the end of the day, this is going to be like a board AFCC question as to how these things are going to be, how we're going to play nice with other organisations, and what does it mean? So it's I think this will I think the AFCC, we kind of started talking about some of the potential projects that might be external, but this was a different scenario again, which it was an HL7 Australia project, but I think there's a bunch of consequences that need to be understood for external projects, which are not really that well defined at the moment, I think. So anyway, I might leave that one. We've only got 10 minutes left. So I might just look at. I did want to talk. We did have a brief session on the Australian Fire Management Framework and considering the FHIR Work Group and what we might offer as a set of things that we're interested in. So, and basically, like I just ran off a list on the top of my head, which I kind of repeated at the AFCC meeting as the FHIR Work Group representative there. Just about things that were essentially the ability to assess quality of the artifacts. Basically, these are the kind of requirements we just talked about for provider directory. We need to have a variance statement. You need to have certain qualities in the IG content itself. That will include a bunch of things. I actually went away after the AFCC meeting and really considered what if I was looking at projects, how would I assess? And I think this needs to be reconciled with the FHIR community process, Australian FHIR community process kind of work. But I was thinking of having something around. And this is really where maybe the FHIR Work Group would have concerns in assessing some of these things, just because some of them are governance process questions and some of them are technical things. So I think there's a question on who would assess what part. But like it was really just trying to say different aspects of how a standard gets developed and the things you might consider, an indication of community sort of process activity. So it's just the stuff like, how does the project get initiated? How do you define the scope of the project? How does it relate to other specs, right? That's kind of an important ecosystem behavior to really know why you're writing a standard and how it relates to other standards. And sort of upfront, how do you form some consensus development group? So how do you get a group together that's a representative group that can actually make decisions, and who can be a member of that? What kind of participation is there in that group? How you make decisions within that group, what's the process for deciding one thing or another will be actually done. So that includes the scope of what you're doing plus the content of what you're doing, and just any issue resolution methodology. Who gets to decide at the end of the day how the decisions are made. There's business validation, so whether it's suitable for use, which kind of also is reflected by are FHIR-IGs accessible for general feedback on the content to be validated. So can you validate that they're suitable for fit for purpose in some way, which is kind of like saying have accessible things. I can validate them in a technical frame like connectathons or other usage where you can actually assess that they're actually fit for purpose, and having some ability to do draft and trial use kind of levels, so you can sort of have things running in a pre-production and production environment to really assess that they're suitable. Other quality assurance things, so that basic quality assurance, like are you passing the FHIR QA checks? Is your terminology assessment good? Things like that. So it's just a sort of basic quality stuff. A variance statement for sort of harmonization questions. How do you approve the final standards? Like how do decisions get made to say this is actually finished now? How do you get that approved? How do you resolve any issues in that approval? What's the participation in that approval process? Then accessibility of the artifacts. So are artifacts available for use? Can you see a history of artifacts? Are you in the package registry to be able to get the technical artifacts from the FHIR registry? There's intellectual property questions in terms of what we'd expect, but certainly usage. You need usage information as to is this free to use? or not, or whatever, and just accessibility, and what's the sort of position on downstream use. So if somebody's deriving from your spec, what can they kind of, licensing wise, what does that mean? And some ability to have an ongoing review process, including things like raising issues and how to deal with breaking changes. So that was kind of stuff off the top of my head.
Question.
And yeah.
Why is it called implementing community process?
Because the AFCC is responsible for the Australian FHIR community process being implemented. So I wanted to sort of make a distinction between the protocol of the community process, whatever that means, and actually things that you would assess and what is the evidence of implementing a community process.
I guess the implementing part I quite understand. It's the community process as a noun, and
language.
I'm a bit, I don't find it very clear piece of terminology.
Well, I think because the AFCC defines a community process. Like, it's not any community process. It's the one that is defined.
Yeah, it's effectively Australian community process. Yeah. So, like, I think
maybe it would be clearer if you called it if it said, to assess implementing I don't know, Australian FHIR community process or something other like that, to prop that in the mind of a person who wasn't thinking AFCC when they started looking at it.
I agree. It just says community process, and this is very specific to that defined process. So I think that makes good sense.
Yeah, I think we would want to relate this to those things. Yeah, and I think because part of it is like part of this is like how would we as the FHIR Work Group assess any of the HL7 Australia work in terms of this? And the answer is like, well, I can look at project initiation, and I have a mechanism, right? I have a governance process that says how I initiate projects. And there's aspects of that are trying to deal with all these things, right? So
we can use this on the PD stuff.
Yeah, exactly. And so through this process, like I can go, HL7 processes cover a lot of these things, right? So I can point at aspects of the governance process where I go, I have a mechanism for this. I can tell you what it is, right? And then it's into the more content related sort of stuff and so forth. But I think if I was going to say you're implementing a community process, I'd like to think you could address the community aspects of all these parts, right? Because if you are just producing a spec and I don't know how it came about, how you defined the scope, how you made any decisions, that's really not acceptable as a community process, because it's something you don't know where it came from. Daniel.
Oh, hang on. I just realized we're at time, but I'll
we are.
just summarize by going, I don't quite get it. I mean, I do, but also with the FHIR Work Group. So I'm not sure why we have to deal with the process stuff. Isn't that the AFCC? I don't want to. Can we just deal with the spec itself?
I think you're represented through Brett. So Brett needs your perspective to bring back to the AFCC. You're quite right.
Yeah. Yeah. So I think some of these are more process questions, because we've kind of said, as a FHIR Work Group, we recognise we're going to use these HL7 Australia processes. Yeah.
Yeah.
So and so this is really like basically most of this is HL7 Australia process, and then we get down to FHIR AG sort of content variants and maybe fleshing out technically what you'd expect to see. And
so we're saying the FHIR Work Group is providing the AFCC with a set of recommendations on how they should be judging whether or not someone is doing process properly.
Well, I want to say, like, if a FHIR AG rocks up and I have no understanding on the scope and why and who's the stakeholders and how you made any of these decisions, I have a problem with the content already. right? Because it's just that the actual formation of the content and the scope of the content has not come through a community process. So you haven't reflected how it relates to any other standards or made sure that isn't overlapping with an existing set of standards, right? So even just the formation of the concept of that standard existing has not been assessed, right? So if you come along and go, here's my spec, you can define your own scope, I guess, but I would like you to really assess how that relates to the PD spec, how that relates to AU core, and that, if there's overlaps in relationships, right, I want you to say what we do that's different than what everything else does, right? And I think that's the kind of process where I think it's hard. Like if someone rocks up with a FHIR IG, and how do I assess its quality? I can say technically it's formatted correctly, it's got a variance statement.
Let's hold this over to another meeting. I'm due
Yeah,
to
it is.
The FHIR Work Group doing process stuff.
That's good because I
non-HL7AU things.
Yeah. I think that's fair, but I think too, like I wanted to do this to say how HL7 Australia deals with it and these aspects, and so I can say here is what we would say about all these things, and that, so effectively we're saying we're following a community. This is what we're defining as a good community process. These are the aspects you should consider. So we can hand that up to the AFCC and say these are the things we consider are important. And
fair enough.
And what the FHIR Work Group actually does in terms of external projects, I think remains to be seen, right? Because, like, if part of the process is things need to get approved by the FHIR Work Group, that's okay. But if I was to say that, I would go, whilst I technically can do some things to check a FHIR IG, and that's just like mechanics in terms of are you doing the right things. I think there's an aspect to say, what is the scope of your spec? Why does it exist? And how does it relate to other things? Because if you come along with a spec and I go, we already have half of this reflected in other specs, why are you doing it again? That's the kind of thing I want to also address. So it's technically correct, but it's just that you've completely overlapped with a whole bunch of stuff that is already done, or something like that. We need to be able to sort of assert that stuff as well. But I think this is just more to have a discussion with the AFCC as well in terms of how it manifests in a
so
some
what
kind of
do
process.
You need us to do? You've got this list here. Do you need us to
really.
provide feedback, to, I guess, not object to you providing that to the AFCC?
I think more, I just wanted to say I've been worked on it. I'll bring it back. I think I'll bring it back again to get some kind of further input. At the moment, this is just a private page I was working on. So okay. I think I might have a chat with Ruben and a few others about how to frame this, and then I'll bring it back to the FHIR Work Group. We can really carve out things that you think the FHIR Work Group would be interested in dealing with, I think, which would be kind of, I think, what we would want to do. And I think in general, the FHIR Work Group already has a standing position that the HL7 Australia governance processes is the way we deal with some of these things. So I'd just like us to say that's how we deal with those things in HL7 Australia, right? And we agree that they're things that need to be done, right? So if we could do that, then that can kind of go back to the AFCC, because I'm really trying to push the AFCC to get very specific about what it means to have an external project, and who would do what in the process as well, because I'm not sure the AFCC can assess anything really, because we're not like kind of group. So we're more of an oversight group. So I'm not sure who actually does the work. I'm not sure who actually says your project initiation was a good idea. Yeah. Anyway,
looking at this, looks like the sort of thing that lots of people will have done. Have we got good lists we can steal, or is
yeah, that's what I was
this a
hoping.
good
when
way to go?
yeah, I'm sure somebody's done something this, because this is like basically what's a good consensus standard process is really what you're trying to say.
Does HL7 International have a usable one that we could use?
I tried to find one. I'll keep
Okay,
looking.
if they do have one, it's unfindable. Okay.
But anyway, I thought I'd just run that by you as something that will come back again. So that will probably do for that. Anyway, I think that's about all for today. Thank you very much for coming.
Thanks.
Okay. Bye.
Bye bye.
See you
Cheers.
later. Cheers.